Hey everyone, it's Heather Nichols, and today I'm going to share a heartfelt sympathy card with you that I created with the Field Notes 2 kit. I'm using the sketchbook bouquet stamp set that's included in the kit, and it has this really pretty floral bouquet and lots of really lovely sentiments. I'll be using the coordinating stencil and die as well. I'll be using Pixie Spray to hold that stencil in place. I'll be adding spatters to my project with the splatter background stamp. For ink, I'll be using chocolate truffle and sugar cube inks. I'll be using a die from the Stitched Banners Stacklets die collection. I'll be using the second size from the smallest. To color my image, I'll be using the BrushmarkerPRO markers, and this is my color pick palette that's available in the web store. I'll be using that along with a brush and a cup of water. And then for an extra adhesive on my project, I'll be using foam squares to pop a few things up. To get started, I will be stamping the background of my project, and I'm going to use the floral bouquet image from the set, and I'll be stamping that on Toffee cardstock with sugar cube ink. I'll stamp the center bouquet first, and then I'll use the coordinating stencil mask to cover up that image, and then stamp the bouquet on either side of that center image. That way I'll have a full background of flowers without the images overlapping. You might know that I love adding spatters and splatters to my project, and I love the new option with the splatter background stamp. This stamp has splatters that are perfectly spaced across so you can cover your whole project with splatters. I'm going to stamp the splatter background stamp across this background that I just stamped with the floral bouquet, and I'm stamping this with sugar cube ink. So I have a little bit of adhesive to hold the cardstock in place, and then I will set the splatter background stamp over the top, close the lid to pick that stamp up, and ink it up to stamp those splatters. If you want to add splatters to a smaller area or just intensify the splatters in a certain area, you can use the smaller splatter stamp that's in the sketchbook bouquet stamp set. I'm using that stamp here with chocolate truffle ink to add a few of the darker colored splatters across the background. I've cleaned the sugar cube ink off of my stamp, and I'm going to stamp that flower bouquet again. This time I'm stamping it with chocolate truffle ink on the piece of the watercolor cardstock. Next, I'm going to watercolor my image. The chocolate truffle ink is a hybrid ink pad, and so it will work with watercoloring. I'm using my brush marker palette, and I'm using all of the colors except the blue for this project. I'm going to do a watercolor wash over the whole image, and I'm using a mixture of the burgundy and henna colors. I'm doing my watercoloring on the MISTI media mat, and so I took the markers and I scribbled them right on the surface of the mat, and I'll use a brush to mix those colors and then watercolor wash them, which is basically a really wet brush, and I'm brushing that really wet brush over the whole entire image. I wanted the petals of the flowers to stand out just a little bit more than they already were, so I'm mixing up just a little bit more of that color and going in and touching that color right to the petals on the flowers. Once I have my main color wash down, I'm going in and adding some detail. First, I'm taking the burgundy marker and just adding some darker shading around the centers of the flowers. The watercolor cardstock will still be wet from the wash. If it's not, you can always add some extra water. The color will start to flow, and you can use your brush to pull the color where you want it to go. Next, I'll do the stems with the curry color. I'll take my paintbrush to dampen the area where the stems go, and then touch that marker to the stems to add that green color. And finally, I'll do the flower centers. I will touch the blush marker first to the flower centers that I've gotten wet with my brush, and then I'll add the henna. I'll just dab that along the sides of the centers to add a little bit of shading. I'll add a few spatters to my watercolored image using the small spattered stamp from the sketchbook bouquet stamp set. I'm stamping that in chocolate truffle ink, and you'll notice that I'm stamping it twice just to get a variation of shades of color like I would if I was using an actual paintbrush to spatter the paint. Next, I'll cut out that floral bouquet image using the coordinating die. I'll line that up and then just use Scotch removable tape to hold that die in place and run it through my die cut machine. For the sentiment on my project, I'm using the With Heartfelt Sympathy sentiment from the sketchbook bouquet stamp set. I'm stamping that onto watercolor cardstock using chocolate truffle ink, and then I'm cutting the sentiment out using one of the Stitched Banner Stacklets dies. I'm ready to put this card together. I added some stitching to the bottom of my background using my sewing machine, and then I'll add that to a sugar cube card base. I'm adding the sentiment banner to the floral bouquet. I'm attaching it so it comes out of the bottom part of the bouquet, and then I'll attach the bouquet and banner to the card front front using foam squares so they pop up just a little bit from the card front. And now this card is done. I hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. You can find the supplies that I used to create this project in the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody, and I'll see you next time.